Hello everyone and welcome to the Creative Noahland podcast. Sometimes in life, we could all do with a little advice, especially as artists and creatives. Well, on this episode, we're joined by someone who does just that, the artist advisor, Dean Melbourne. As a successful artist himself, with multiple solo shows under his belt, Dean has gained both the knowledge and experience in the art world that he now shares with other artists and creatives to help guide them on their journeys. In this episode, we discuss Dean's extensive career, the highs, the lows, and everything in between that give Dean the social proof to be able to actually be the artist advisor. We also talk about the grifters or snake oil salesmen in the art industry, what success looks like as an artist, identity, imposter syndrome, why the best way to learn is to teach, and also why it's so important to develop not just the art, but ourselves as well. But not only that, Dean kindly gives us his top 5 tips for artists and creatives that will be useful whatever stage of the journey that you're on. And let's face it, that's why you've really shown up. That's what you're interested in. Anyway, you can check out the links to Dean's website and social media while you're listening to the podcast, of course, but this episode is full of inspiring stuff, so get your pens at the ready as you may want to take some notes. But now, let's get into it. Dean, you're the artist advisor. Should we go straight into it? Have you got maybe like a list of top tips that you can give our Creative Noahland audience from your years of being said art advisor?
Yeah, probably. I have a funny relationship with top tips, but I think we can do it anyway. And then maybe we'll talk about why top tips are sometimes problematic. But I guess my top tip is about developing yourself as well as the art at the same time. So I meet many people for whom the art is very well developed, but the social interactions or the stuff that goes on around it is difficult because they've not done as much work on themselves as they have on their work. Some people are vice versa, that some people are really well developed personally, but they haven't put the hours in on their work. So yeah, develop yourself and the work. See that as 2 distinct areas. Look after your relationships would be tip 2.
With who?
So professional relationships with your peers, with clients, potential clients, with people potentially who are in some way further down the line than you that act as kind of mentors or advisors. And particularly the people who are your cheerleaders. Look after those relationships, bear them in mind, appreciate how much value they can bring and look after them. So that's the 2. And then number 3, I would urge people to constantly see themselves as students, constantly with the attitude of what could I learn, what's not quite right. So a cynical attitude about your own work at times is really useful to push you on.
Would that be simply for the artist rather than, because you don't want to portray yourself as the student to necessarily galleries or potential buyers?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, what we're taught a lot about being confident outwardly about the work and backing it, and absolutely you have to back what you do. But I think we can have an internal dialogue. The fundamentals can always get better, but you can always communicate more clearly visually. You can always learn to understand line better or tone better or colour better. There's always something that you're probably not quite doing as well as is possible. So continue learning. And also to a certain extent, I do think that people that understand the arts really understand that there has to be progress anyway. This notion that you present yourself as the finished article, that line, doesn't really wash. So yeah, that's 3, isn't it? Going to go for 5. I would say to invite critical voices into your studio or into the work. If you can't necessarily your physical studio, because some people live not around other artists, but there are so many ways now online or digitally to get good critical voices into the studio that are going to challenge. ask
But
a
that
question.
takes quite a lot of bravery for the artist, the creative to go,
Yeah.
look at me, look at my work. What do you think?
It can do. It doesn't always have to be quite that conversation. I think it's a really great place where your peers can play a part. So even if it's being brave enough to say, I've just finished a piece, and invite 3 peers to come and look at it and give them free rein to say what they think and take on the position of everything's learning, nothing, there's no offence.
And also, I suppose we have to give humans credit. Most people aren't mean.
No, they're not mean. In fact, I would say the opposite. I would say the arts have become a very nice place, which is why critical input is so important. And social media accelerates this, of course, because it seems that everything's framed in a positive way. So if the worst that happens is that people don't comment.
Yeah.
But there's not as much critical engagement as there used to be. And there's lots of confidence building. And the word support comes up a lot.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because again,
Yeah.
when 20 plus years ago, when I was at university,
Yeah.
you would have to go into your crit and everyone in the 30 people in your photography course or your visual communication or your art-based class would say what they think.
Yeah.
And in those situations, interpersonal relationships, whatever, some people could be dickheads.
Yeah, they really could.
And it wasn't necessarily constructive.
It was almost legendary, wasn't it? The art room crit.
Yeah.
From people crying, or it was almost like it was like a thing to be feared. To a certain extent, it was true. And some people that haven't had that journey haven't experienced that.
Yeah,
and
through art education, and perhaps they've come to art in later life from a, I don't know, background of accounting or something. They've never had.
And we generally live in a culture where criticism is difficult to take. There's more offence is found in things, I think, than used to be. So having 30 people in a room egged on by your tutors, it's a difficult experience and it depends on your personality, but actually it's really good.
Like you say, allowing that critical voice into your work.
Yeah, it is difficult. And then I would say that is one of the distinctions often between clients who come to me thinking they want to be, in inverted commas, a proper artist. That's one of the kind of briefs that I get from clients. And then actually that is probably beyond what they really want when it comes to the reality of it.
Allowing critical voices, that would be number 4?
Yeah.
One more, and then I think we should talk about what qualifies you to be the art advisor.
Yeah. So what's
number 5?
I would say, and I'm surprised myself as I'm even saying this, number 5 is to, at times, make things less personal by treating your artistic identity or seeing it through a business lens. And I surprised myself by saying that because really I'm a romantic about being an artist. And I got into the arts as a romantic, as someone that really believed in that stuff. And yet, if I look at my own story and see where I made progress, probably was at the point where I started to detach a little bit emotionally and started to see it even in a slightly more business-like way.
And I think we can definitely go into that when we say more about your story. There's some fantastic gems of, I know you don't like to call them top tips, but I think the audience that listen to this podcast will appreciate those a lot and will take them on.
We're trying to avoid the social media hack. Yeah, there are no hacks to this, but there are general areas of attention you can pay on.
Does that lead us nicely on to, why do you call yourself the art advisor rather than all these people online, exactly like you say, who are the art coach or the guaranteed 10 grand's worth of art sales? I do this, follow these simple methods and you will sell for. So does that go back to your romanticism?
Well, it goes back to a need really for clarity and telling the truth. I call myself the artist advisor because coaches, their primary job is to help someone come to the right answer themselves. A mentor is always from the position of having been somewhere that the client hasn't and helping them perhaps not make the same mistakes or go do things a little bit quicker, the benefit of experience. And I use those things at times, but oftentimes I'm more opinionated sometimes and I'm more of a teacher. So some of my background is teaching. And essentially the attitude that I take is that if I've got an opinion about something or some advice, as long as I'm listening carefully and openly, I can save people an awful lot of time by telling them that.
You're their critical voice, essentially.
At times, yeah. And sometimes that is in an art sense. And sometimes that is in a, I would say, business stroke personal sense. Sometimes there's some things that are very obvious in terms of someone's behavior, say, that I see blocking their progress.
Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, so it could be. So someone could say that they're very nervous to exhibit. And so they build up a kind of a lot of walls around that. So then they might say, oh, I'm not at the place where I could get a gallery yet, or I could rent a space, or I could apply to be in this or that. And I might be saying, it'd be really good to show some of your work. And to avoid it, they will inflate it. I might see that they're doing that. And so what I really want to say to them, which is what I can, because I'm an advisor, is why don't we just do a show in your garage and invite some people? And it shortcuts that.
Minimise the impact.
So yeah, I'm really skilled coaches with really good understanding of how to get people to places will do that. It will still take some time. And of course, the benefit of coaching is that if people have the idea, not you, generally it sticks. However, I find that if your client trusts you and he's fully on board to develop, you can speed up that process a little bit. But I'm not playing a game of trying to get the client to a place. I don't really have time for that. And also, I don't love taking money from people, and I value their money. I value that they're paying for the service. So I want to give them the information.
But there's never been a temptation to go, I'll get some more clients in by going, I can guarantee that I'll sell your work. The reason I say that is because I've got this crossover between commercial photography and my artwork. And when I first started trying to explore some more, I found some of these art coaches online and I thought, oh, I'm interested. I wonder what they have to say. They're all selling some sort of course or, dare I say, snake oil salesman, get rich quick off your art thing. And I bought a couple, and I'll be completely honest, they weren't hugely expensive, but I read the 3 that I bought, and there was nothing groundbreaking in there to me that I don't think anyone could have learned from potentially listening to this podcast or potentially any of season 1 of the Creative No Land podcasts.
Yes.
So, how do I say this? You're not there for the grift. You're there to try and make artists better.
Yes.
Not necessarily at their art, but at their practice, their business acumen, their...
Yes. And it is a constant self-awareness battle of trying to run a business and tell people what the results of working with me could be versus making promises or grifting. So there's a constant self-checking of that. And at times, I would say that it makes me think about not doing it at all. Because there is, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, the proliferation of people offering this is huge. Essentially, what seems to have happened is that artists have very quickly figured out that if they're in any way a chapter ahead in the book on anything, then they can teach that. And of course, I'm absolutely fine with artists making a living however they need to make it. But I think that they're often built on very specific tricks or processes or particular things that people can do, which is fine. Like you want to teach how you build a landscape, teach that process. If people want to pay for that, it's great. Where it gets difficult is where people are promising big career jumps. It's either sales or getting the gallery, despite all of the changes in the arts. They're still the 2 things that really are the fishing lure that works for people. And so I don't talk about that in my marketing. And there is no guarantee that if you work with me, you'll sell more work. There's no guarantee that you will suddenly attract a curator or a gallerist. However, I suppose that what's implicit in what I do is that I believe that if you pay attention to some of the things that I'm going to help you focus on, you will become, in inverted commas, a better artist. And naturally that could happen. If you want to sell a particular number of pounds worth of art, then that is it's a completely different conversation. The difficulty is that it's been wrapped up as an arts development conversation when actually it's a online business conversation.
Yeah, it's a sales funnel. It's attract attention.
Yeah, but I suppose the benefit that the people that sell to artists have is, because of social media, aspiration is high. Entitlement to success is very high. So it would seem that to most people, if they're not having success, there's probably an answer that they haven't come across, a trick or a particular piece of wisdom that will unlock what everyone else seems to have. And it's just not the case. And some of these programs are run by very respectable organizations. Either way, there isn't a secret. There's nothing they're going to say to you that is the piece of information.
And what works for one artist creative
Exactly that
won't work for another artist creative. You might be hugely introvert, so it's very difficult to go and push your networking skills.
So you look at an artist and you'll see their self-development journey, their confidence levels, their ability to communicate, their geography, the type of work that they make, the type of success that they see as success actually isn't this one-size-fits-all thing.
Can we talk about that a little bit? So I think it's interesting. Do you still think the gallery holds the esteem for artists that you think it should in 2025? Or because realistically, we live in a time that it's almost much easier to do it on your own without a gallery.
Yeah, in a sense. Yeah. So, yes. And I think it does still holds a massive kind of draw. And to a certain extent, as an artist myself, I would have to concede that it still does for me too. And I think that's partly because in a business sense, it makes much more sense to have a third party talking about how good you are. Or if a gallery takes you and puts you in Frieze Art Fair, it's an unspoken third party endorsement.
Social proofing.
Social proofing, yeah, absolutely. It's a great phrase. And that is like catnip to artists. Even the ones that will profess they don't need or want that, get their heads turned at times by that idea. And then, of course...
But is that only dependent on, say, the level of the art fair or the level of the gallery?
Yeah, and the difficulty will always be that wherever you start your social proofing journey, wherever you get that social proof, there'll always be something just above that you are still not approved for.
Yeah, you get into Frieze Art Fair, but Saatchi Galleries invited someone else.
Or you'll be in the very top art fair, or maybe you'll be on a really great stand with a great gallery at Art Basel, but you'll be the lowest selling artist. We're human, and it plays on those insecurities, and it plays on some of that ego need that we have. But also in a business sense, often artists are just relieved to not have to deal with money.
And also sometimes artists can sometimes not be the best talkers about their work, communicators about their work. They might be great on canvas. So like you say, having that third party endorsement, that third party voice that's going out and they're talking about you, you don't have to do it.
Yeah. And of course, the competition in that area is being amplified all the time by people who are more and more adept at things like social media, presenting themselves in a particular way, coming across as very sleek in the studio. Their studios look great. Their clothes look great. They talk great. The lighting's great. And
it sounds like you're describing the Creative No Land podcast here. All style, no content.
Well, yeah. And it's that, it is that all, is it all the gear, no idea? And and the truth is, there's a bitterness thing that happens then, and people go, that's all rubbish. Because they can't compete, they go, that's nonsense. And then, of course, when you look at it, there are times when there is all the gear and an actual idea, which is an uncomfortable truth for people, because now we're not only competing with people that are pretending to be good, but they actually are, and they can do the other stuff.
That's an interesting factor as well in terms of artists and creatives' egos. I saw a funny, whatever it was, a reel or something the other day, and it was an artist starting his work, and then it was basically this comparison. Because on social media, we can see some incredible artists, and you're about to pick up your brush and start painting a blank canvas, and you flick through Instagram and you see someone who's made this 14-foot canvas with the most beautiful colours and detail, and you think, why am I bothering?
Yeah.
That comparison culture, it must be a big blocker.
Well, it was always difficult, I think. It was even pre-social media. For those of us with what I would say a troublesome ego, and I'm definitely one of those, which is probably why I understand people's struggles and I can see their behaviours sometimes, is because I'm certainly not exempt from this. I've really struggled with it. I remember someone saying to me, Uni, are you happy with your work? And me going, not really. And they go, what are you comparing it to? I go, Frank Auerbach, Caravaggio. This is the bar,
Lofty.
right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm doing this,
But
why would I
were
not
you
bother?
comparing it to
Yeah.
them, or were you comparing it to the idea of what you could create in your brain?
So in my brain, I could make a Caravaggio, but my
That's
hands
what I mean.
couldn't.
You in your brain go, this is what this piece is going to, because I do it all the time.
The thing, I was competing with the artists that have been, and now, of course, we think about how they end up in the canon. Artists love art libraries, and creative libraries are great. And you're sitting there and you're looking, and because you're pushing all the time and you're aspiring to things, and that can get dangerous. But for most people, it's like it pulls you along. Now, if you fast forward to now, and it's so confusing that people are now not even only competing with artistic talent, but they're competing with an ability to understand tech, or they're competing with an ability to style. Or,
again, like you say, someone could be deemed as successful in inverted commas because they've got 100,000 followers for their art piece that you can't really work out what they do. But they're, like you say, they're very good at their social media. They play the game. They have the hook.
Yeah. And so one of the things that's changed and evolved and continues to change is the motivation to be an artist at all and what success looks like. And the mid-level often is the most difficult. So people know how to aspire up to the middle, and then the bit from there gets really difficult. There's a big kind of pool of artists in the middle of the game that are.
What does that look like, the middle of the game?
Well, it can be anything, I suppose, from depending on what your idea of success is. Selling relatively successfully or frequently at, say, an affordable art fair, maybe I would think of that as being in the middle of the game that we're playing. And then there are many galleries that, again, try and I think about a sliding scale, and at one end of it, there's a concern for art, and at one end of it, there's a concern for money. And there are many galleries that try and straddle the middle ground of that. They will profess to, and some of them genuinely do, have a real concern for the art, but they've also got a real concern for business, and for obvious reasons. And they
want to keep their gallery open, presumably.
Yeah, absolutely. And it tends to be that there's a lot of confusion or camouflaging one and the other around that, particularly people professing to be very much about the art when actually it's pure business and there's not very much interest in the art. And then, of course, the artist comes along whose concern often, not always, is very high at the art end and very low on the financial end, except for the fact that they need to pay their rent.
Yeah.
And then they end up working with a gallery whose concern is further back on that sliding scale, and there's a mismatch and frustrations happen and things like that.
But that goes back to, like you say, what people define as success, because there might be those artists in the middle of the road, or even solely, dare I say it, social media artists these days, because we do live in a time where some 100,000 count artist makes abstract pictures, but they've done really well in tech and they're selling lots. They don't need the gallery.
So there are two things going on there, aren't there? One is that what's likely is that in 100 years we might look back and the most important artists aren't making what we traditionally think of as art at all. In fact, they may be purely social media operators, and that may become art in 100 years, and people will see
that will be the art library that we
art.
see the Caravaggio in. They're going to go back and look at this person on social media. They had 200,000 followers making this.
And it could be that they were making something that, anything, frankly, nothing to do with anything that we consider art now. That could be the art. What's the phrase in the film Basquiat? Everyone's looking for Van Gogh's ear. That could be that thing. So we need to not lose sight of that, because artists sometimes can be very, and myself included, quite narrow in my ideas about the arts. So for me,
is that a certain, again, romanticism, artistic snobbery, shall we say?
Absolutely. And I've been guilty of being very snobby about painting, for example, because my education was in painting, and I had this belief that painting was the top of the art form tree, if you like. So the truth is that we don't really know at the moment whether some of the people that are presenting brilliantly as artists really are or not. There's a really interesting kind of game going on there.
Is that a good point to go back a little bit, talking about your background and painting and things like that? What qualifies you, Dean, to be the art advisor? This is where we have to go back and talk about your own art career.
Yes, and this is really difficult. This notion that, I have a constant battle internally about nobody should really listen to me. There's no good reason to listen to me any more than anyone else.
The imposter syndrome, you mean?
It's kind of imposter syndrome. I like to think that it's self-awareness, really, because, I work with some, both professionally and as clients, but alongside some incredible people that have achieved, in many ways, a lot more than I have. And I have to remind myself sometimes that it's a communication issue and there's an ability to pass on knowledge. And I probably have to acknowledge that there's a good chance that my real calling is as someone that passes on knowledge rather than an artist myself.
That inspires others.
Yeah, that's a constant thing that I have to battle with. So what qualifies me? I always tell people that it's not about me. It's about the things that I've learned. And I have always had this kind of delight in learning things and telling other people about them. I don't know where that comes from, but I maybe started to see the joy that my tutors at college would have of passing that on. And I would go, oh, that's really interesting. So if I'd learned something, I'd want to tell someone almost straight away.
The best way to learn is to teach.
Yeah, maybe. It's like I get excited about new bits of information or new skills. So I did a painting degree at Wolverhampton.
You did fine art at Wolverhampton.
Yeah.
What's the journey into that? And let's go into it. What sort of work are you creating and what was your mentality? I know there's a lot wrapped up in this, but...
Yeah. So...
Presumably you thought you were going to be an artist when you came out of university.
Yeah. And I was at university when the YBAs had the Sensation show. So it was really impactful. Before that, I'd ended up at art college essentially because I was the kid at school that drew. And that kind of formed part of my identity as an artist. And then when I left school, I remember talking to an art teacher and he said, you should go to art college. You'll like it there. You'll like the people. I was like, okay. So I had to go
Not because of your talent, you'll just like the people.
Yeah, you'll like it there. You'll like the people. And
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. So I thought, well, I'll go. And I did an interview and then I had to do what was called, this lower level BTEC. And that was the start of my journey. And I loved it. And he was right. I loved the people. And it seems to me that the main difference between art students or people that gravitate towards the arts is sincerity.
Okay. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So I was always a very kind of feelingy person, and I was always overly sincere and romantic about feelings, about thoughts. I thought they were important. I thought my ideas were important. And I suppose the word is earnest. I was really earnest about everything. And my mates, for the most part, were like most people, most lads, they were brilliant piss takers and hilariously funny, brutal. But sincerity was not okay. It was the worst thing to be about anything, let alone something as flowery as painting.
How did they react to that?
They called me, my nickname, weirdly, they called me the Thespian. And I had nothing to do with acting or drama. So his nickname was the Thespian. Yeah, I was overly emotive about things. And so when I got to college and I saw other people that were okay with being sensitive and earnest in their ideas, and I suppose the big conversation growing up here was the idea, I suppose, that I constantly faced, that caring about your own thoughts and ideas was like having ideas above your station, really. Yeah. A little of who do you think you are kind of attitude. And it manifested it for the longest time in me having a really difficult relationship with being from the Black Country, for example, when everyone seemed quite proud of it and loved it. I was a bit like, all right. I even thought about having elocution lessons at one point to get rid of the accent, which I think speaks a lot about this desire to change myself.
It's funny you say that because in the podcast with PJ Ellis, a very proud Brummie, we talk about that, how there's something about being from the Midlands and the accent and this, that and the other. Are we the victims of our own
deprecation? I think we're like self-deprecating ninjas, right?
I like self-deprecating ninjas.
Which and it is difficult and it's real. And it will happen that if you step outside of your comfort zone that you may face.
Is that what you sort of meant when you talked about the geography of an artist?
I think so, yeah. That and their background and their understanding of their belief of what can be achieved You know, there's this thing of people like me don't do things like that. We've all got those, and obviously they're geographically linked.
Yeah.
People from here don't really do things like
And
that.
I think that's very relevant because obviously I know the progression of your story a little bit more.
Yeah.
But shall we carry on that progression?
Yeah, let's carry on the progression.
It's definitely
So I was the arty kid.
Yeah.
And then I got to college and I loved
wasn't
it.
The thespian.
Yeah, and I wasn't very good, really. My ideas were far beyond what my hands could do skill-wise, and I didn't always have the patience to learn skills, but I really cared about these ideas, and I got very into, like, being in the art library was gold for me. I started reading about Munch and Dali and all, and I think I fell in love with the idea of being an artist as much as doing art. Like
the persona that comes with being the artist.
Yeah, and what that might allow you to, I suppose I learned to do things with it that were okay. Like, it meant that because I was often earnest and quite romantic, it meant that I could talk to the opposite sex quite well, which a lot of my mates up to a point struggled with. So that became, I suppose, a thing for me.
It helped you get girls.
You know, so yeah, I was always falling in love because that's where all the feeling was. That's where all that earnestness could live, and I liked that. I didn't realise at the time, just looking back. So yeah, I did college, and then I didn't do great, and then I had a moment where my tutor, he said, "Do you want to go to university?" And I ended up thinking I better had. So we had a meeting where we went through my portfolio of what was 3 years at college then, and made a yes pile and a no pile, and we were making a pile. And
how was that?
Yeah, well, I thought it was great.
That's the crit, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the
crit
that's going to work.
So there was a pile getting bigger and bigger, and I was thinking, oh, this is going quite well.
But let me guess.
Yeah,
the no pile.
That was the no pile. So my tutor said, grab that, follow me. And he walked me downstairs out of the building, round the back, and made me throw it in a skip.
Oh, not even keep...
No, even the portfolio went in the skip.
Wow, that's quite extreme.
Yeah,
then he for life lessons.
Then he followed that up with, I think you can do a lot better than this. I'm going to teach you to paint.
So and he must have seen something in you to...
Yeah, I think so. And in the next 3 months, I developed an idea for a project. I think the film Usual Suspects had just come out. You know that visual with them all against the thing? Well, I got this idea of doing that, but painting human representations of the 7 deadly sins.
Okay, interesting.
So they're going to be life-size, black and white paintings. And he said, here's the paper, here's some black acrylic, a tub of white emulsion, here's my brushes, I'm going to help you do this. And that's what I did. I did that. And that's
what did he teach you in that time that you didn't know about painting to help you achieve that collection?
It wasn't so much that he taught me things I hadn't been taught before. It's that he showed me again. He would literally take my brush and go, that action. And I'd go, because it turns out that I'm really good mimic. I can learn by mimicking quite well. And I get it. So it was one-to-one. Visual learner, yeah. Really kind of urgent, quick, almost like too quick for a lot of people. Kind of physical.
Yeah.
And I'd go, okay. And then he'd leave me, and next day I'd have done some, and he'd go, yeah, that's it. Maybe a bit more of this. Boom. Yeah.
Great.
And suddenly I could...
So huge influence for you then.
Massive. Yeah, massive influence. And he's still a painter. I should say his name. His name's Andrew Sylvester, and he's an amazing painter and does some incredible work. And the other thing that he did for me was, before that, he had an exhibition, and he'd taken me and a couple of other students to the private view to see it. And there were these set of incredible paintings. He was painting gardens at the time. And there was text in them that you could just about make out, oil paintings. And there were people there looking at them and asking him what they were about. And I just fell in love with the whole thing, you know.
So not just the art, the idea again of being being the centre of attention, being the
centre of attention, but also his art was very beautiful and very sincere. So I loved this beauty and this sincerity about his work. It wasn't just that he was centre of attention, it was that people were genuinely interested in what he had to say about things because of the work. So in some sense, I saw that the art gave him a platform where his opinion started to matter. And that was really interesting to me, because I felt like someone whose opinion didn't matter ever. So I suddenly thought, oh, maybe that's how if I want to be listened to ever, maybe it's that. So his art was speaking, but also he was able to speak. It was backed up by the fact that he'd made this thing.
He had the social proof by being the artist who had the opening to show you perhaps how you
absolutely.
could be.
And artists have a social proof. So there's this idea that artists, there are all sorts of social proofing. There's an authority that comes with an ability to be an artist, particularly a very good one. So anyway, I saw all of that. I thought, that sounds great. I got taught to paint. My confidence was up a bit. And the last bit of that was that he wrote to the head of painting in Wolverhampton, who'd been his tutor, and said, Dean's portfolio is pretty thin, but there's something there. I think you should give him a shot. And he did.
So they must have recognised that as well.
Yeah.
What do you think they were seeing?
I think it was just care. I think I cared.
They could see that you wanted to learn, you wanted to progress, you wanted to do this.
I think I spoke like an artist long before I could make art.
The thespian.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got to uni anyway, and there were maybe 45 people in my year.
And was that a turning point in terms of you've had this sort of one-to-one painting tuition? When you went to uni, you're surrounded by people presumably of equal or similar.
I would say that I was about the 45th good painter.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that self-deprecation again?
No, I don't think so. I think that's pretty accurate.
But then would that not been the opinion that probably most of those other people sat there going,
some, but
wow, I'm the worst painter here because of that?
Some, but not all.
Inner self-critic we all have.
I don't think it would. Lots of them were pretty confident. And
really?
Lots of them were older than me. And also, we got to our first assessment in our first year and everyone's grades came out and mine were terrible. So it's confirmed. I knew that I wasn't.
How does that work? Because again, you're creating art to a marking criteria at university.
Sort of,
It's not necessarily all about, the final piece is fantastic, Dean. But you didn't do those 3 sketchbooks of prep work of where you decided and where those influences came from.
I hear you, but the self-evaluation would say that there wasn't anything that was going well at that time. Again, I reverted back to having really high ideas and couldn't manifest any of them. Nothing was coming out. It went terribly. And I almost tried to take on too much all the time. Again, it just didn't go well. And the other thing that wasn't going well was physically, it was like I'd forgotten everything I'd learned at college. I couldn't paint again.
Why?
I don't know. I think it was to do with the environment. I didn't feel comfortable. I was in a bigger space. I was tight, I think, and I would try and accelerate my ideas and what I was doing too far. So outstretch myself and then therefore make nothing. So I did this for 2 or 3 years. So the first A I ever got in anything ever was my very last module at uni. So I went from D's all the way up to A's at the end. And by the 3rd year, I got it and I was understanding it and I was flying.
And up to that point, do you think that had just been a paralysis through want of perfection?
Yes, I think so.
So what changed that in your final?
My hands caught up a bit. So I was able to start producing ideas that I had. I wanted to be Gary Hume because to me, the most romantic painter of that YBA thing. So I wanted to use interior paint, gloss. But the conversation was like, what's going on here? This paint is about domesticity. It's about certain spaces, certain colours have certain contextual ideas. I just wanted to use it because it was sexy and drippy. So there was this constant argument with my tutors about this idea of truth to materials. But I figured out a way of doing a thing. What I figured out was it meant that I didn't have to paint properly to be good.
What does that mean?
Well, so what I ended up doing was I would take overly earnest paintings. I would trace it. I projected it. I drew it using silicon sealer. So it was like a raised line. And then those raised lines I would then fill with different blends of paint. And then I'd hang it with light and it would cast shadow. So the shadow would make the drawing.
Wow.
And what I made for my final show looked really interesting. It was all white on white. It was very beautiful. But it required no ability to paint in a traditional sense, no ability to model or represent. I just figured out how to make what looked like contemporary art.
So why was that the only project that got you the A at university?
Because I think I started to understand how to make something that looked like art. And
But surely that's got some sort of subjectivity to it.
Look like art.
That your tutors must have gone, oh, we agree that looks like art.
It's a very narrow set of objectives, really, because it looks like art that year amongst these people who are having this conversation. Of course, to the wider world, that I don't really know what it was.
Yeah.
But what it did do was make me think about alternative materials, and it made me think about different ways of drawing. And actually, it would be easy to now go, oh, yeah, I just played the game. But like everything, I believed it. I grew to believe it.
You didn't play the game because you only got the A at the end of the system. So I
got the A for the final show. And I think it was because I wrote an all right statement about it that showed that I understood what I was doing. There is something to be said for really being able to understand what you're doing and the context of it and why you're doing it. And I still think that is important. But again, nothing's balanced, is it, these days? So one thing's either terrible or it's brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
This is terrible, that's brilliant. And what I'm trying to do all of the time, and I think even in the artist advisories, hold that space. Instead of throwing out the whole idea that the academization of painting is really terrible and go completely the other direction. Like trying to hang out in the middle of that. And because sometimes what that allows us to do is pick and choose. So if you say, for example, being able to write an essay about your own painting, no one should ever have to do that. It's a ridiculous thing to have to do. It's a terrible way of thinking about painting. That's a really great way of letting yourself off from having to do that work.
Surely that essay that you might write would be a contributing factor into some of the stuff that you advise people on getting better about talking and understanding their own art.
Yeah, absolutely. But some people, I think, there's like a defensiveness that allows them to avoid things. There's always something that people have got a barrier with. They're always in one camp or another.
What sort of barriers did you think you had at university?
Well, one of the barriers was that everyone seemed to be making work about quite difficult subjects, difficult personal subjects.
That's whole sort of bit more confessional art.
Mental health. Yeah. And that seemed to help quite a lot. Firstly, it helps because it gives you a lot of drive to make that work because it's important to you and it's part of your story. And secondly, it seemed to me that the tutors found that sometimes more difficult to criticise. Not always, but sometimes. And so I felt like I didn't really have anything particularly difficult to say. I was
despite all these romantic feelings.
So what I did was try to fight against it for a really long time and went, no, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. My life's pretty good, right? So I'm going to make work about pleasure. Why is there no positive art? I'm going to make some positive work. And I thought I could defeat the system with that. And then in the end, I thought I'd probably better get some problems. It's much easier if I get some problems.
Hey, sorry for interrupting. This is just a quick reminder that if you're enjoying this episode, there are a couple of really easy ways that you can support the podcast. You can hit the support the show link in the show notes or consider grabbing yourself something from the Creative Noahland shop on the website. And don't forget, community members get free shipping on all orders. So, before you buy anything, be sure to join. Thanks again for being part of the Creative Noahland community, and now, let's get back into it.
Yeah, so I started digging around for some problems, and I found out that there was potentially an issue around gender. And so I started cross-dressing. So my final 8 years in uni, I was cross-dressing a lot and thinking about my relationship with femininity and having some quite big epiphanies, actually. And
can you say more about that? Because that's quite an extreme road to go down, exploring identity.
Yeah.
And
these things would have been present anyway, but I was keeping my eye out for my own psychology, I guess. I started to ask questions about why I thought certain things.
Such as?
One of the
why do I think this?
Okay, so there's a link. So on and off, from being a student all the way through till now, I've really liked the view of figures that is almost dead-on, full-length figure, with the view being from the waist middle. Botticelli did that in Primavera and things like that. So you're looking up at people on a stage. I always loved that. And I started thinking about where that came from, where I first saw that. And I had this memory Oh, it was catalogues, like Freeman's
Yeah,
catalogues.
fashion catalogues.
That my mom had. I
Yeah.
think my mom was like a rep for one at one point or whatever. So we had these big catalogues around of women's clothes often. I say women's clothes, they were all clothes, but I only looked at the women's sections and I got obsessed with these images of women in often like long floral dresses and in these very overtly feminine poses, I now realise. And I started to remember this. That's really interesting, isn't it? And I sort of started to think about what that was about. And then other memories started to come back to me of things that I'd done. I'd remembered trying on a pair of tights that I'd found when I was 11 or something. And then I was thinking about the fact that I wasn't that comfortable around like lads a lot and all of this stuff. So anyway, it was there. It wasn't that I didn't invent it for the sake of the degree. It was there, but I certainly probably started digging around a bit more than I would have otherwise.
But was that something at the time? It's these big, bold, confident characters. Would this be the thing that this sets me apart from everyone else? This is the thing that makes me different. It's not even necessarily about the art anymore.
No, so there's a certain element to all of my art, I think, that is confessional, and it's about this internal urge to go, yeah, I'm going to say that. I'm going to say that. Fuck it. I don't know if I should say that about myself. Oh, no, I'm going to say that about myself. It almost felt to me like that was my job. Because if artists don't do that, if artists don't own up to stuff or deal with things, then it seemed to me that was the job that was the role for the artist.
It's not very normal for an accountant to suddenly sit there and tell you about his deepest, darkest feelings of identity.
No, but what I would think is that through an artist doing that, people talk about artists speaking for them, or they see a thing and they go, oh yeah, that really spoke to me. And I suppose I always felt like I wanted to be braver in terms of saying who I was. And I was coming out of a place that felt very inhibited and I felt very scared to. So it felt like my job to challenge that, really.
But yet, what was the reaction to your cross-dressing? Was it positive, negative? Because if you're scared about identifying...
Mixed, you know.
Yeah.
Mixed. So my nan, the most black country lady I ever met in my life, she said, oh, you make a fine wench. And wasn't really that fussed. You know, my friends, some of them just chose never to speak about it. It was often ignored.
Were you going out and presenting yourself in everyday...
No, I'd like, look, I was very aesthetically minded. So there were certain things I wouldn't do, but Eddie Izzard was starting to be a thing back then. And so I started to just essentially mix and match male and female clothes a bit. And I'd do a bit of makeup and I'd do the nails. But it wasn't, and I wouldn't go down in the local pub like it. But when I was at more...
sort of the New Romantics even.
Well, I started looking at the New Romantics and I was looking at that kind of gender thing and trying to figure it out for myself. So I was researching around what it was and quickly figured out that it, for me, was probably more of a fetish thing or more of a sensual thing. It was like a sex thing, probably.
But it didn't feel about the art?
No, but it felt like my art should be about that.
Because that was the identity that
because that felt like the most urgent thing to deal with. Yeah. Right. So I started making work about that.
What did that look like?
Well, it was quite literal, really. And I think this is often the case with younger artists, isn't it? Is that their work is a bit more direct, a bit more literal. So I was chatting to a friend at uni and they said, what you should do is go somewhere where no one knows you and we should do the full thing and I'll photograph you getting ready or whatever. And then you could use those photographs. And so that's what we did. She was doing an MA at this point. I went down to stay at Wimbledon College and stayed with her in her house. And discovered that nothing's important in London, right? You're pretty invisible no matter what you do, which I certainly wasn't invisible in Kings Winford.
Again, down to that geography.
It's geography, right? Yeah. So I was like, oh my God, you can do anything here. Nobody cares. It's all great. In London, it's very difficult to get noticed. Anyway, so we went down and took a bunch of photographs and I started making paintings from those photographs of me. It was hidden and but it was me.
And what was the reaction to that from your tutors, from your peers?
By this point, I was at the point of just leaving uni and we had one tutor who was really supportive and I was working with two other artists. So we put on a show in Birmingham and it was called Tell the Truth, Shame the Devil. And the whole idea was that Shakespearean idea in Hamlet, they put on a play of a murder and say, watch the eyes of the king and you'll see he recognises it and you'll see his guilt. So we had this idea that actually, if we show things to people, and let people see them, they'll go, oh yeah, I recognise that.
You'll see what resonates with.
Yeah. So we did that. And then our tutor invited us to put that show on again up at the studio in Manchester. And then after that, everyone went their separate ways, stopped work, went to teaching then. And it was like my career was, I'm going to,
Did you have those aspirations though after show? And
yeah, of course.
I'm going to come out of university, I'm going to be an artist.
Yes. And I knew that it would be a bit more difficult being in Wolverhampton, but I still presumed that there'd be a version of Saatchi that would come along and go, yeah, you next. Then I'm off.
So what actually happened?
So what actually happened was after about 6 months, I started to realise I didn't have any money or a job. So I went begging for some work experience at my old college. And
this is where the element of giving back almost comes.
Yeah. So how that started was I was like an assistant. And it was great. I loved it. And I did that for 2 weeks. And then they said, oh, someone's left and they teach the adult life drawing class. Can you do it? And I kind of went, no. I was like 22. And I'd been good in the life room. I'd been all right at that. But I was like, I can't teach adults. That's ridiculous.
Right.
But anyway.
What, because of that imposter syndrome of being a 22-year-old student?
Yeah. And anyway, they took me into it and it went really well. And then over the years, then I picked up more hours. I ended up a personal tutor and working on different courses and all of that stuff. So I ended up with
But were you still practicing any of your own art at this?
Yeah, a bit. And again, it's something that I talk to clients about now. There was an idea that being an art teacher is the perfect job to have as an artist. It was the worst for me.
Why?
Because I tend to mimic what I'm around. I tend to be the product of the thing that I'm around. So when I started teaching BTEC, for example, all of my work looked like BTEC students' work.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So even though you'd had degree education, this, that and the other...
Because, I wasn't able to
that
separate.
You're around.
Yeah.
Those inputs, I suppose if we talk about that on the podcast, we are a result of our inputs. And if all your inputs every day are BTEC artwork...
Yeah. It was like...
Did you feel like you were regressed in something?
Yeah, I got worse. I got a lot worse outside of uni. I really regressed. And I started to go, this it was just I did just play the game at uni and now there's nothing really. And I was a teacher. I did 8 years and I loved it. But all I did, even then, was I taught all of the things that had been taught to me. I just repeated them. And I was really good at that. Like I'd been told this, I understood it. Like life drawing, for example, I'd been taught to life draw. I was pretty good at it. I taught exactly the same lesson, almost word for word that I'd had and got results. And it was great. And I was like, that's beautiful. I love that thing. And then eventually I started to run out of steam because, again, I was very earnest. So I would earnestly see 30 students a day and give them everything.
All your energy goes into them.
Absolutely.
And you haven't left any room to recharge your own battery.
Exactly that. So the way we worked was you'd give someone a tutorial and they'd invariably be working on a project. And they go, I'm stuck, I've done this and this, but I don't know what to do next. And I would give every student 30 ideas in 15 minutes. And I'd do that 30 times. Easy, in a way. But I'd come out just...
Because you've given all your ideas away.
Yeah, I'd have nothing. And now looking back, I realised that the thing that I am good at, and this is one of the only things that I will say that I am good at, I'm good at developing ideas. I can develop ideas very quickly and understand why I've developed them. So as an artist, I don't think the craft of what I do is particularly off the chart, but I'm good at ideas. I'd say that.
Where do you think that comes from, all those years spent in the art library?
I think it's about
art knowledge.
I learned while I was busy being not very good at art college, what was happening all of the time was it teaches you a process. The process of brief, research, development of ideas, narrowing down an idea, executing an idea and evaluating it and then starting again.
Yeah.
And for being an artist, it's the only education I can think of where the exact process of the education is mimicking being that thing. Because you're not an art student, you're being an artist. And I learned that and it made sense to me. And in the middle bit, the bit about developing ideas is essentially a kind of sideways thinking of link making. And I don't know why, but I happen to be quite good at that. Being able to go, oh, if this, then it might be this, or then this, or it could be this.
The pattern
recognition, isn't it? Yeah. Not all artists who go on to be successful are good at that because it's not really all that you need. And some really successful artists are like fantastic researchers or they're fantastic at the end product. So there are people I think that are better in different areas that have success. In fact, sometimes being an ideas person often is linked to not completing things because the idea is the exciting bit. So completion becomes a bit of a task, really.
And again, that paralysis of perfection.
Yeah.
You've got such an idea of what you want it to look like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I taught and I loved it. I love passing on the knowledge. But again, the world of it is quite small. And I was very aware that whenever I voiced any artistic ambition of my own, the feeling I'd get back from the staff was, don't have ideas above your station. You're very lucky to be an art teacher. You know, it was kind of cool. My parents were very proud of me. And if I ever talked about wanting to move on, there was a bit of a like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to go to London, for example, was the thing I heard said.
Geography again.
Why would you want to go there? It's like, I didn't want to stay. I didn't want to just be a little fish in a little pond that felt like a big fish. I knew there was more. I just didn't know how to get there, really. So anyway, I left and I went and worked at Wolverhampton Museum and Art Gallery. And that was liberating and showed me a completely different aspect of the arts. Mostly one that I didn't love. But
In what sense?
I guess working in that sector of, I guess, municipal galleries is very restrictive. There was lots of competition for people trying to make a career through there. And
oh, I see.
And it was very difficult and not enough jobs for too many people. Lots of people taking themselves very seriously. But what I did do was I would spend most of my time showing around groups of young people, like primary school kids all the way up to pensioners. And firstly, having to show kids in there who didn't hate it, but trying to have a conversation with them about what it was could be really difficult. But groups of pensioners, for example, would be very agitated by it. And you'd almost find yourself almost defending contemporary art to them, which I didn't feel any need to particularly, but they'd be going, why is this art? It's those kind of difficult conversations. And it's very challenging to them. And I would have to develop a kind of social ability to hold that conversation, have a sense of humour about it, and try and move it on in some way. Not always successful, but it put me in the firing line of difficult conversations and people who were difficult to convince every day. So that was a good skill. I didn't love learning it, but I think I benefited from it. And then, I was still a practicing artist and it wasn't going that well, but I got an email from someone who was running a course that was funded by Business Link. And it was a 6-week, 1 day a week, business skills for creatives course. And they'd heard that I was an artist and someone had said, oh, Dean might be good for that. And so they emailed me several times asking me to go. And I kept saying no.
Why did you keep saying
because I didn't, at that time, want to think about art as any kind of business.
I
was going to be a romantic failure is what I thought was a much better idea.
Oh, that's beautiful. A romantic failure.
Yeah. I'd got that mapped out ahead of me to go get more and more angry and bitter.
Conform to the starving artist, but at least I make my art.
Unrecognised and, a chip on my shoulder. So I didn't want to think about it as business. And then this person kept sending me emails. I'll just come to this session. And in the end, I was like, I think I might be able to get a day off work to do this. So I went and I was sat around with this group of people. And there was a jewellery maker and an illustrator and someone that wanted to be a stand-up comedian, all different kinds of soul traders. And the lady who walked in to run it was a lady called Helga Henry, who had been a lawyer and then had become an arts manager at a senior level for arts organisations. She had grown up public speaking and she was super confident, eloquent. And she spoke to us like we were already a success, just that she had some information to pass on. And I responded ridiculously well to this and very quickly wanted to share what I was learning as well. And at that time, I just started keeping a blog. Blogging was a thing. And I started sharing what I was learning on the blog as well. And I started to become a bit of a kind of exemplar for that group. I was doing everything that was asked of me and I was loving it. Anyway, I did so well at it that I ended up being employed by Helga when her organisation changed and I went and worked as her assistant. we ended up running a company that delivered that stuff. And I was fully addicted to trying this on myself, sharing it with other people, empowering other artists.
Going back to that continued learning that you...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I met another couple of people that worked with her who were like academics and business consultants, quite high level business consultants who'd come in to talk to us. I met.
What aspects of business were you learning?
Yeah, so
as an
essentially
artist?
all the course was, each week was a different aspect of the business. So the first week was about building a vision of what you wanted to do. And the last week was about a planning process that was delivered to us by a brilliant consultant called Andrew Bass, which was a way of stepping back from that goal to find out a to-do list. Those two things on their own were phenomenal. Building a vision and a planning
working
process.
backwards to
which is phenomenal.
achieve that vision.
Yeah. And I still teach both of those things now because they were fundamentally the things that changed me. In between that, there was a week on finance and bookkeeping and basics. There was a week on copyright law, legals. There was a week on marketing.
Sounds useful.
It was great. It was amazing. And it was all funded by Business Link. So it's free to me. And one of the things that I think stood out, so we were taught this process of networking, and one of the asks, and it was, do you know someone, or is there someone who you'd like to be your mentor? Would you make that ask? So I went away, and because of my work at Wolverhampton Museum, I had access to talk to an artist called Eileen Cooper, who at that point was the head of the schools of the Royal Academy. And she later went on to be the first female keeper of the schools of the Royal Academy. Wolverhampton had got a couple of pieces by her, and I needed to do a talk about them. So I was going to have to email her anyway. And I thought, okay, I'd always liked to work since I was 16. And in the email, I said, it'd be really great to talk to you about these. I'd also wondered whether you'd be interested in mentoring me. Not that you should, or... Anyway, she sent me a message back and saying, this sounds brilliant. Why don't you come down to the studio in London? You can interview me about these pieces and we'll look at your work.
Do you think you would have had that bravery to ask before this course?
No, I've never had, no. And so I went in the next week and went, I did this and got a result. And everyone was like, oh, wow, it was inspiring to everyone. And I think Helga saw that and thought, oh, here's someone that likes, not just get the result, but really likes to share that result and go, look, it's possible. This is amazing. And so I started teaching all of that stuff at the same time as applying the learning to myself as an artist. And I worked with Helga for 6 or 7 years. And over that 6 or 7 years, the vision that we'd had to make was roughly a 5-year vision, roughly. And my vision had been a solo exhibition in London. And at that point, literally, when my work was terrible, I tried to give a couple of paintings away to a tattoo shop and they didn't want them. I literally couldn't give them away. I opened my solo show in London 7 years later.
Wow.
And Helga was there. And
what was the change? Was it this viewing yourself not just as the romantic artist, as someone that's got to put plans into place, got to put systems into place?
Yeah, I mean, that's very ambitious as plans. And
what I mean is that you had that end vision of a London show. And within this course, the idea was you work out the steps going backwards to make that happen.
The basics of the steps. What I had, the physical thing that I came away with, because we'd done it as a demo in front of the group, I got flip charts of each stage with to-do lists on. And I had these up in my shed for ages. So I was working in a shed at the time. And so they were there, and that thing kind of acted like a North Star.
You were seeing it every day. It's
just pulling me along.
Subliminal messages going, oh, there's my to-do list.
Yeah, so there was a bit of subliminal stuff. And then, of course, that creates a bit of action. And I started keeping a blog that was about my progress. And actually, in a funny kind of way, it was my blog that ended up getting me my first opportunity.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I started keeping a blog that was called, very romantically, From Perfume to Birdsong. And it was the journey of my progress. And so I was keeping a blog about that, sharing ideas, lessons, and then sharing images, works in progress, stuff like that. I was also putting into play the thing I'd learned about networking a bit. And in the meantime, my good friend Chantel had started practicing as an artist. And what happened was essentially she had a show in Bristol. So I went down to celebrate that with her. And at this point, I hadn't been in any shows really since I was a student. And she was very organised, still is very organised. It's one of the great things about her. And she was like, oh, I'm in Bristol. I'd really like to go and see this gallery and this gallery. We got to one of the galleries and they were closed, but they were hanging an exhibition. So we knocked on the door and said, oh, we're from different ends of the country. We were hoping to see the show, but we've missed it. And they were like, oh, come in and have a look. So we got in and we were chatting to the owners, and he said, oh, one of the curators is in the stock room. Go and say hello. So we went in the stock room and there was a guy in there. I said, hello. Oh, lovely to meet you. Hi, I'm Dean. I'm Chippy. Like, oh, what do you do? Oh, yeah, I'm an artist. Okay, cool, yeah. And we ended up going for a drink with them somewhere. Got on quite well. Anyway, I went home, and about maybe 5 months later, I got an email from the guy that I'd met in the stock room saying, we have got an opportunity to curate the summer show at the Royal West of England Academy. It turned out him and his partner had got an art blog as well that was reviewing shows. They were kind of art lovers and art world insiders in a way. And through their blog, they'd been given this opportunity to curate. And anyway, he said, look, I've kept an eye on your work. I quite like it. Do you have anything that you could put in this show? Because we need more artists than we've got access to.
Wow.
We need 35 artists. It was that moment of the actor saying they can ride a horse and speak Spanish. I just went, yeah, cool. And I didn't really have anything ready. I got some work ready. I invested massively.
Did they give you any ideas? Or
No. I was already working on something, but I was going quite slowly on it, a bit aimlessly. And he said, oh, I like what you're doing. I was working on these big, they were oil paint on paper, and it was about myth making and storytelling. But I was taking images that I'd find elsewhere, mixing them together using a digital projector, and then creating new places and landscapes and characters, fictional storytelling. So he said, yeah, they carry on with those. Great. But they were works on paper, and I knew I had to frame them, and I not really done that before. So I took them to Gale & Co., which is an amazing framer in Birmingham. They do stuff for like the Royal Academy, but they're the most expensive people around. So I said, I think this is the time. So I just said to my dad, can I borrow some money?
You've been offered this position in a show. You want yours to be the standout look.
Yeah.
Present them as expensive. Present them as...
I had to, yeah. I felt like I had to. And some of the people that were in the show were already relatively big names as well. So I felt like I just felt like it was the right time to step up the game. And so I invested in the framing and took the work down there. And then essentially what happened was the night before it opened, they shared with some of their collectors a PDF. This is the work that's going to be in the show. And one of the collectors who couldn't be there, he bought 2 of my pieces before it even opened.
Before it even opened?
Yeah. And then I think as a result of that, they were like, well, we'll do more with him. And it was as simple as that.
So again, that link between you're the artist, they're the commerce, the balance between the two of you.
Yeah. And they phoned me and went, we've got this guy who wants to buy 2.
What was that feeling like?
Like, I imagine, like someone taking heroin for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was unreal. It was amazing. And I was suddenly dealing in more money than, it was like a month and a half's wages for one painting. Well, it was more than that. It was 3 months' wages at the museum, and I'd invested 3 months' wages in the framing. It was just mind-blowing.
But did this feel now like a start? Like the snowball was about to go over the crest of the hill? Yeah,
the good and bad thing about that story is that it was like heroin, and I instantly knew that I had to maintain it. I had to keep going.
And what did that look like? So the guys that asked you to be in the show, they asked you to do more stuff?
Well, the addition to that feeling of of the hit, we went down to the show, and I wasn't nervous because I already sold the work, but I walked into the Royal Academy in Bristol, and having already sold, feeling $1 million, we went for a meal afterwards, and the curators loved me, obviously, because it sold, and it was just overwhelmingly brilliant, the whole thing. And even then, if I'd have been smart, I would have spotted the danger there. But frankly, I'd been trying for so long that I didn't see any danger.
Like you say, now was the time you wanted to maintain.
It's like, this is it. We go now. I got back to the studio. Suddenly, the work's easier because there's a point. There's a place for it to go. There's some social kind of confirmation. It all got easier. Everything was easy after.
And what does that journey look like after that initial catalyst that sent you?
What happened then was they weren't a gallery even at the time. They'd done a blog, and then they'd done this show at the Royal West of England Academy as curators. And then I think after that, they started to think, oh, maybe we could be a kind of gallery. But they didn't have a space. They would do pop-ups. They would have relationships with other galleries or other spaces and do things. So the first call I got after that was, we're going to do the Affordable Art Fair at Hampstead in 6 months. Can we have some new work ready? And what was lovely about that, and I think this is great, if you're an artist who can meet someone who's growing with you as a gallery, that's a lovely thing. They were growing, trying new things. I was growing. They were taking me on the journey with them. I never sold massively, but I always sold enough at the shows to keep them going, yeah, okay, it's interesting. And so we did affordable art fairs for a while. Then they said, I think what we'd like to do next is go up a level.
So is that what, a solo show?
So, well, to start with, we did some international art fairs, Art Central Hong Kong, Art Context in Miami, and it was going well. And then they were always really brave. There was a lot of risk taking. They took a booth at what was called Art 14, and Art 15 also happened. And it was going to be like a competitor for Frieze, really. It was at Olympia in London. And they said, eventually, we're going to do this. And so it was a bit of a step up. And at the same time, they'd had a relationship with a gallery in London, and they'd narrowed it down to about 6 artists. And they were doing a sequence of solo shows. Went through that cycle twice, so I had 2 solo shows.
Were you feeling like the proverbial middle of the road artist at this point? Or your brain, were you like, no, I'm the...
I was... well,
I'm sure that's the differentiation.
Yeah, we were in the middle, but I felt like we were making really rapid progress through it. It wasn't static.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what was really weird was like, I went from going, I would love to get into the Affordable Art Fair, to suddenly going, I'm not sure I want to do that again.
Well, again, it's that...
I don't want to get pigeonholed.
You've done the journey, and the things that you thought you would achieve that would blow your mind, and now I've done that, so it needs to be Frieze, or it needs to be bigger.
So I had 2 solo shows, and both went quite well. The second one, for whatever reason, didn't sell as well, but I got good reviews.
You were living the life. You were after parties at the Groucho Club.
Yeah, and I was in London a lot, and I was hanging out. We met some of the collectors, and it was great. We did all sorts of interesting things and got access to places that we wouldn't normally have got in. Yeah, it was good.
Like you say, taste of that heroin.
Yeah.
You want to maintain that.
Yeah. So I'm still back here making work, and that's okay, because there was constantly a deadline. So I'd be in the studio making work, and it'd be like, 3 to 6 months, we're doing this. You need new work. So it was like really on it. And it gave everything purpose.
And had that idea of geography now gone out the window? Yeah, I'm working in Stourbridge, but I'm selling in London.
Yeah,
it doesn't all over the world.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. And so it meant that also what I could do was avoid the local art scene.
Did you feel like you were, better than the...
I have to say, I always think I'm better. I've always thought in one level that I am the best artist in the world. And on another level, I'm...
But again, you're on that same level, you're so self-deprecating.
Yeah, it's like, it's one or the other. But I was really trying hard to not to speak to people in that way, or not to behave in that way. But I didn't have to be involved with anything locally because I was busy, right? It's all good. And then it very quickly became about the next thing. And the balance was always that I was still trying to be very sincere and authentic about the work and run proper art projects, really. So for my last show, we rented another space. We got actors. We built a set. I made a film. I got a filmmaker to come and make a documentary about it. The process of making the art was really big and involved. So I was trying to be very genuine about it. But at the same time, it was on my mind that people needed to buy it. Otherwise, I wouldn't get another shot.
Does that conflict with that? I've got to be true to the art. Again, that balance between commerce.
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because on one hand, I think this is underestimated by people. The need to hit deadlines will accelerate your ability like nothing else.
Yeah.
In one way. Having to paint and get it out and keep going. I made more paintings in 5 years than I'd made in the previous 15.
Because done is better than perfect in a lot of sense. Because it has to be.
There's a bloke coming with a van.
There's a van coming. This has got to be done. Yeah. Well,
And I dealt with all those things. Like,
Was that a battle though? Did you battle against that when you looked at work? Because we do go into that. There is a idea that nothing's ever perfect.
Yeah.
But when you're balancing that, did you sacrifice some of this?
Of course. Yeah. And there were art fairs, for example, where I got stuff ready and I either wasn't that well or it didn't go that great, that I sent stuff that was below par. And I really regret that now. That idea that an album is all killer and no filler. I suppose in the end there was some filler. There was some killer for sure, but there wasn't all. And there was stuff going out that definitely wasn't of the right quality. But it was more important to me to maintain the feeling of being wanted. That's what the real thing was. It was my gallery wanted me, and then my collectors wanted the work.
So there was ego. I am the artist.
Ego, but no, it was more like I always felt like I worked for them. I liked working for them. They thought I was good. Like if we sold, it was we sold. I loved that. It was like I was part of a team almost, part of a family, and I was doing my bit, and I was getting the love back, but everyone was getting a result.
Yeah.
So it was great. It was really good. But
so what happens then? Because when we spoke earlier, you said that success was one of the worst things that could have happened, really.
Yeah, it is, definitely. Success, I think, is probably one of the worst things that happened to me, in the sense that, personally, there's a slight, as much as I tried to, a slight losing sight of why you make the work in the first place. The relationship with yourself and your work and the buyers becomes this triangle. It's not just between you and the work anymore. It's this third angle to it that means that it's not as intimate anymore. So there's that. And then...
Did you feel like you were creating art to a brief? Not a brief, but to someone else's demand?
A little bit. And I was frustrating to the gallery, I think, because I would constantly change what I was doing from one show to the next. They just feel like they got a handle on how to talk about a particular set of work. And I go, no,
your
the
style,
next thing's
Dean is this, Dean is that. And then suddenly you were changing.
So I was a bit changeable for that.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, it's great now. It's definitely a good thing now because I'm not bound to any particular style now.
Yeah, and there was something that I read very recently, actually, that's quite poignant. I can't remember who said it, but it was about how the artist spoke about their artistic ego doesn't dictate what the medium is. It's about communicating the message. So if you're an oil painter and suddenly go, actually, I'm going to make a sculpture because that tells the story better. Yeah. It's about that visual communication.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent you need that freedom. It's very easy to get seduced by materials.
Does that conflict with what a gallery wants? Because they can put you in a box and go, this is Dean. He does really dark, beautiful oil paintings. We've got a collector.
That's definitely the perception. And again, that is definitely the case in the middle ground. So I think if you think about artists that are operating right at the top of the game, they can pretty much do whatever they want.
It's the name. They're almost the brand, isn't it? Like Damien Hirst, he can convey a belt.
Do whatever. And you can do that. I think if you're a well-known painter, there's a good chance probably you could go, I'm going to do a show of sculptures. People will be interested. Whereas if you're operating in the middle ground of painting sales, that's pretty difficult for a gallery that's operating there, which is one of the reasons that people in the middle of their career, I think, get quite stuck. I only didn't get stuck, not because I was very clever or anything. It was just that I naturally had to do something. I wasn't very good at repeating myself. Just couldn't do it. So I had to keep moving and keep trying things.
So where does this all fall down? Because you don't come to the conclusion that success was probably the worst thing that could have happened for you, or perhaps you weren't prepared for it.
What I wasn't prepared for was to lose it. And I always knew that it was a possibility that it would go away, but it was like the biggest fear, really.
What happened?
So what happened was...
made it feel like it was going away.
So we had a show in 2016. It was a solo show in London. And 2016 was a weird time. There was stuff going on politically. I think Brexit had just been announced. My show was in winter. I'm not sure that matters. Lots of people still came, but some collectors didn't make it over from overseas. Anyway, it got quite good reviews. It was quite a dark show. It wasn't the easiest to sell. It didn't commercially do that great. And at that point...
How did you feel at this point? Because presumably...
I was exhausted.
Yeah.
There'd been a chat about 8 weeks before the show about whether we were going to pull it or not, because I wasn't ready. And I was ill. I was mentally not very well. And the gallery, bless them, they were so lovely about it. They were like, we don't think really you should carry on and do this. You're going to make yourself unwell, but we're not going to. I was like, please don't take it away. I've got to do it. So I did it, pushed through it. And they'd then come to the end of their cycle of shows anyway, and they ended up getting a different opportunity offered to them to do something slightly different. And they'd worked really hard with us as a group of artists. They put so much risk in, and they'd always been brilliant with us. And I have to say, there's a lot of talk now of galleries that turns out, have not been as honest as you might think. My gallery were brilliant. They're called Coats and Scary. They're great. They always paid me. They were always honest. They kept every gentleman's agreement they ever made. Fantastic. But they were like, we think we might do something else for a bit. Probably we've come to a bit where you now need to go off and do your own thing and build a CV that isn't just with us, which makes perfect sense.
But what does that feel like in the moment?
I felt instantly like I'd been ejected from the aeroplane.
Really?
Yeah. And I just panicked.
And take it personally?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, because...
Despite them explaining that it was just a different business opportunity.
They were lovely to me. And I was really not the easiest in the end to be around because I felt like part of the team. Yeah, I felt like we were doing this together. And also I knew that I was like hanging on by a thread mentally to get the work done as well. So it was mixed feelings.
Was this the straw that sort of broke the camel's back?
It was really. And I'd not been well for a while mentally, and I'd kind of made my way back from that. And then I just panicked. And it was almost like I knew that this was the end of that journey for me. And I did everything I could to stop it being the end. What I should have done was just relaxed and gone and done some work. Because, of course, what it's very difficult for us to imagine now is that people can't see everything that we're going through, right? Because we feel like we're so visible, and I was online a lot, and it felt to me like this was apparent to everyone. But of course, no one knew what was happening. If I'd have gone away and just done some work for a couple of years and made some new work, that would have been perfectly fine. Yeah. But I didn't.
But presumably there is that demand on you as a working artist. You've still got to sustain. You've still got to pay bills. You've still got to do this.
All of that, yeah. And the other thing was that by this point I'd left any job that I'd had, and I was now a full-time artist. I did some day rate work as a consultant occasionally, but I was predominantly making a living as an artist. And for a couple of years, that was phenomenal, like more than I could ever have dreamed of. And then that had tailed off to nothing very quickly. So yeah, now I was financially in a hole. I'd got a practice that only worked on quite a large scale, really. I worked only on not just large scale paintings, but everything was like big production, like pre-made canvases, made to measure canvases. They were very expensive. Everything was getting framed. I had a system.
Yeah. And that you'd learned presumably from the business link. And
I tried to do the whole job properly and make it so that I was doing it all properly. But of course, what stopped was the outlet. Suddenly there's this blocked pipe and the pressure starts to build. But I didn't really wait for the pressure to build. I just panicked. And what's the phrase? I fell off. And
was there some self-destruct in there?
Yeah, well, it was kind of like, this is going to happen now anyway. And it's humiliating. I think my overwhelming feeling that I felt long before I ever needed to was shame.
Really?
I was really ashamed that I hadn't managed to keep it up, because it felt to me like I hadn't made it in some kind of massive way, but I'd done all right. And
like you say, you kind of in your head you were looking at the affordable art fair in Hampstead going, I don't really want to do that.
Well, I was way beyond that. And I think we just had a conversation about a potential one-person show in LA.
Wow.
It was going to be the next possible thing.
So your dreams, your aspirations, your dreams, they're all there. And then suddenly
but I knew that I had nothing except the work. No, I had no relationships with any buyers or collectors myself. All of the people that bought my work, really, I'm sure they liked the work, but really they were supporting the gallery. They were supporting the gallerists. They had good relationships with them. And so they were theirs. And I was just a guy. Now I'm just a guy who doesn't really know anyone. Certainly not people that buy art for the kind of money that I was selling at. And then in the meantime, I had developed a chronic illness through overthinking and stress. And I'd got psoriatic arthritis, which was starting to catch up with me. The medication was starting to catch up with me. And
Did that
Yeah.
mean you physically couldn't paint?
I could, but it was getting harder and harder to put that many hours
Painful.
in. No, not painful. I was just tired a lot. So I was dealing with what essentially was like having chronic fatigue syndrome.
wow.
So I knew that I was going to have to change my work. And yeah, and then what I entered, I guess, was this, like what I've later read in, as I read more about psychology and particularly Jungian stuff. So I entered these kind of the swamplands, this drudge, right? I entered this difficult forest. It's like that the Dante's Inferno thing. I was 37 and I didn't know where to go or what to do. So things went wrong for a long time. I made bits of work that didn't work. I tried to change things that didn't work. Tried to be more commercial and just do selling art for much cheaper. That didn't work. Didn't like that. Couldn't do it. Tried to take all the money out of my practice and just do very conceptual things for myself. That worked to a certain extent.
That the two polar extremes? There wasn't the balance again.
No balance, no. It was like I was swinging like this
Yeah.
crazy pendulum, which people do when they're
This
in.
might work. No, this might work.
Yeah.
This might
I was just going
work,
from one to the other and nothing working. And I could feel that feeling coming back of not being able to paint. So,
Really?
so the work was starting to get worse again.
Paralysed.
And overthinking. And the predominant feeling was, and this is the work, I suppose, that I continue to have to do, and this is very personal to me, is that for me, it's very difficult to see a point to making work that doesn't have a place to go.
Okay. It needs to have an end point.
There needs to be an audience. This idea of audience, some people are great. They make their work for themselves. They make their work because they are involved in a journey that's internal, and then they happen to make a product, and then that happens to find an audience. And that is a beautiful and probably idyllic way to make art. That is the preferable way to make art.
Yeah.
What I have to face is for whatever reason, an end point, an exhibition, a deadline gives purpose to the thing.
Is that a result of all the learning going, oh, I need the goal, need to work back to the system?
Yeah, and again,
rather than the goal actually being,
yeah.
Oh, I just want to express myself.
So we talk about the pendulum thing, of course, not just in the work as that happened, but in the theory, in the idea of, so all of these techniques work to create success, which for a while was the thing that I've thought of as the enemy now. So now goal setting, strategy, all evil, horrible.
They're affecting my creativity, my process. I just want to be free to create.
But I couldn't shake them.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, so there's this notion, isn't there, that being strategic is in any ways bad, particularly as an artist.
Yeah.
You must be authentic and it's about the work, and of course.
And that's great.
And I swung right back to there,
Yeah.
except my brain actually needs a bit of strategy and planning.
Well,
otherwise,
like we've discussed,
Yeah.
I think it's if artists thought of themselves in a slightly more entrepreneurial way, hence John from Cosimo,
yes.
which we will get onto later down the line, who is obviously the person who suggested you for the Creative No Land podcast.
Yeah.
But
John's
yeah,
been big
it is a balance.
Yeah, it is a balance. And this is where individuals' relationship with this stuff needs time to be explored and to be seen. And this is why one size fits all art courses to improve your practice don't work.
Yeah.
Because there's quite complicated psychology going on. And I'm certainly not any kind of pseudo psychologist, but having real conversations with people about their motivations and what's really going on is very useful. Sometimes uncomfortable, but that's not going to happen in a do you want to make 16 grand a year kind of course.
Did anyone have those while you were going through all this? Did anyone have those conversations with you? Did you have any of those mentors again? That were
I had some therapists.
Yeah.
So they were suggesting some thoughts. And yeah, the people that had been around, the other thing that had also happened was that while things were going well, I was much more popular than when they weren't. This is also a true fact. And I've said to people, it's much easier to be successful than it is to struggle. That's why really I should have been more comfortable in the notion that not everyone could see that I felt it was going wrong, because it wasn't really. It's a very natural process, and other opportunities probably would have come.
Do you think if you hadn't have panicked and had just gone, I'm not creating at the moment, but I can still use all the skills I've learned of networking. I'll go to that show. I'll meet that person. You went down to Bristol on a whim to see your friend and ended up in a gallery.
Yeah, That's a very good point. Going backwards was very hard for my ego. It wasn't easy to do that. Yeah, I was embarrassed. I was just embarrassed to do
Well,
it.
look, you said the Hampstead Affordable Art Fair was, some
Yeah.
people would dream of doing
Yeah,
that.
and I did too.
And you did.
And I remember at one point saying to myself, when we just stopped doing affordable art fairs, I remember thinking, you know what? If this experiment doesn't go well and I end up back doing affordable art fairs as a career, that'll be brilliant. That'll be perfect. Of course, I didn't feel that later on. I'd got ideas back to that tape of that I grew up with, ideas above my station again. Or were they above my station? Who knows? It's like, is there a station? Maybe. But so I was back to this dialogue again of who do you think you are? Look what you've said you did, and now you couldn't maintain it. Look what you had in your hands and you lost. And
you gave yourself the irrefutable evidence that you could do it, but then when it was taken away, you didn't really think you could do it again.
And there's a thing, isn't there, about Alan de Botton talks about this beautifully, the idea of if we believe that anything is possible for us, what we also take on is that anything that we don't achieve is our fault.
Yeah.
So it's...
What a great channel that is, The School of Life and Alan.
Yeah, it was really important to me back then. That notion of status anxiety as well, that his book talks about very well, I think is great. And that status anxiety, the book helped me quite a bit.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I reckon there's people listening to this that will go, status anxiety.
So
that sounds like what I've got.
Status anxiety, I first heard the phrase when I read a book by Alan de Botton, who talks about essentially the lengths that we will go to appear to be keeping up with the Joneses. So it's like so sometimes it's status in terms of money. He talks a lot about executives clinging on to the status that people getting promotions, and then you come home and you realise you don't really know what you're doing. And I recognised that for me, that anxiety around my status was a very big issue for me to deal with. Then, so the journey has been, that was like 9 years ago. And over the last 9 years, the process has been walking through that swampland, learning about myself, rebuilding, getting ready for a next phase, understanding what was great about what happened and what wasn't so great, understanding what I want for the future, and also understanding that I'm one of those people that when I'm in pain, I feel like I'm going to be stuck like that forever. I panic quite a lot. I don't have a sense of time passing. So I'm not calm because I don't think about this passing.
And but in that 9 years, is this where we start to develop the artist advisor?
Yeah. So during that time, we all went through lockdown, didn't we? And all of a sudden, everyone was struggling with work and shows, which was great.
But what I'm asking is, in the sense that, like, you battle with this idea again of regression and not being the artist, say that perhaps you thought you were or could be.
Yeah.
So again, in some ways, a little bit of a regression, but that love of what you enjoy doing, of giving back to people.
Yeah.
Give back all the information that you've learned. Where did you feel like that developed from? Or was that some sort of coping mechanism for you not creating so much art and being in this sort of 9-year recovery in some respects?
I think it's recovery, yeah. There's lots of conversations about the notion of the wounded healer. But my understanding is that many people that are in the kind of trade of healing in one way or another, counselling, psychotherapists, there's often a motivation that is about them, that they themselves carry a wound. So I think there was a sense of that. Also, on a practical level, at this point, I was running out of money. And I thought, what else could I do? What do I do? What am I good for?
Was it really that extreme? What am I good for? Not how do I make money in my art?
I always tried to use that. No, at this point, I've decided that attempting to make any money from my art was a really bad idea. And I didn't know whether that would be permanently. Maybe 7 years ago, I was like, I need to detach money from my art. Maybe forever, but certainly for now, to try and build a relationship with it again. I was still occasionally doing day rate consultancy work and still enjoyed that. But what I hated more and more was being in front of groups, standing at the front of a room with a group of people, which predominantly all my work had been. And I was always very nervous. I was always terrified. And the biggest thing I did, I was a host for the first TEDx Brum with Helga. We were just hosts, but it was a crowd. And then we were live streaming to Colombia.
Wow.
It was massive and it was terrifying.
But you did it.
I did it then. I realised that actually group work, standing in front of a class or a group, was very stressful. And then lockdown happened, and a couple of people had asked me for advice. Will you look at my practice? I did a few of these kind of for free, and I thought, I wonder if I could start charging people for that. I don't really like the idea of charging it, but frankly, I can't keep doing this.
It goes back to what you said. That relationship with money is a bit of a strain.
Money's difficult, and I don't like taking money from artists, especially because they're often pretty vulnerable, and money is often difficult for them. But people started saying, you really helped, and it's really given me value. And so then lockdown happened, and everyone started using Zoom. Everyone got really comfortable with Zoom and online meetings. And I thought, I don't even have to leave my house for this. This could be really great. And
did that find a bit of purpose again for you?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And also that giving back to others is that selfless act, in a sense. Actually, it makes me feel good that I'm helping others.
I think it made me feel better than it made them to start with. And also,
that's not a bad thing, though, dude.
No, I think it's okay. I was still giving value, but I do recognise it. And also, I think what really helped my self-esteem the most was that, firstly, there was the thing of being wanted again. I started to see that I was a little bit wanted, and that was lovely. But also, there was a feeling of independence. Again, I was suddenly in control. If I worked really hard at the business, I could scale it up, or I could keep it quite small. But either way, I was now in control of my own destiny.
And when you've been spiraling potentially mentally...
Even before that, I'd either had a job where you're not in control of your own destiny, you can be very redundant, or I was working with a gallery that held all the cards in terms of collectors. I had no power there, really. Suddenly, it was like, okay, this is much smaller scale, but it's mine, and I can decide. And I had lots of help to build it up. I have to say, it wasn't a natural thing for me, and had some difficulties in running it. But
what do you feel like you had to change about yourself that would make it easier for you?
I'm not very organised, and that, again, recently been diagnosed with ADHD. I now realise what some of the stuff I was up against. But also, there were some very clear kind of business strategies that I needed to do that I couldn't figure out how to do.
Even from the crossover, all the stuff you did with business, you couldn't see the...
There's a lovely phrase that, funnily enough, Helga left me with. In a lot of senses, you can't tickle yourself, is her phrase. So even what you should be doing, sometimes you need...
Oh, that idea of, I know the advice, but me taking that advice...
It's really difficult to process sometimes, or you can't see...
I see that, because a lot of the times I can give great...
you
give great advice to everyone else, and then suddenly someone comes...
Which is, again, part of the thing to deal with imposter syndrome, isn't it? But I quickly understood that actually there isn't a direct correlation between the result and the information. I am on the journey as well, and it's fine. And some bits I'm really good at times, some bits I need help with.
It goes back to the thing, the best way to learn is to teach, and
Yeah, absolutely. And I know people that have other skills, and one of the things that I guess is part of what I talk about is in a world where artists have to do everything for themselves, be everything. The idea of delegation or asking someone else to do something seems impossible now.
Or even just asking for some help.
Yeah, asking for help is a huge one. And it's not seen as a very noble thing to do in a way. But one thing, I suppose, to my credit, I think, is I'm quite good at asking for help at times. I have been quite good at making the ask at certain times.
So did you have to get people in to help you with a little bit of those organisational skills when you were setting the Art Advisor up?
I worked with my friend who's really great at setting up businesses. And then I worked very briefly with a virtual assistant who helped me set up some systems to manage things like bookings and calendars.
Great.
I worked very briefly with a financial advisor to help me set up some bookkeeping stuff. All of that stuff I went elsewhere for.
Do you think that's important for people that don't feel like they're good at an element to go and find someone to help them with systems? Like they say, that delegation thing. It's a bit of an alien thing to do, to ask for help, but actually you could save yourself a world of trouble.
Absolutely. Another phrase, there's lots of phrases that come from my old boss, Helga, but one of them, there's an idea that you should do what only you can do in a business. And of course, what most people say is, I can't afford to pay someone because I'm not earning any money. And I get that. And I get that there's a kind of a circle to be squared or whatever.
I feel that, especially doing the podcast, I feel like I'm chief everything officer of all of my brands, business, Matt Wilson Photography, Creative Noah and Matt Wilson Artists. I'm trying to do it all.
Yes.
And like you said, sometimes that spreads too thin.
There's going to be a time when there's a leap to be made. where you go, actually, I need a person to do that now.
I need someone to organise the guests.
And I'm going to tell you immediately, you won't be able to afford it. But that's where progress. You have to go backwards to go forwards.
It's that investment in oneself, isn't it? And I think to a certain level with season 2, I am investing in myself and the podcast.
Yes.
But like you say, later down the line, there might be a leap where I go, someone's going to have to do the editing. Someone's going to have to organise the guests for me. Someone's going to have to produce the social media stuff for me because I'm...
because there's going to be a thing that only you can do. It doesn't matter how many people you employ, there'll be a thing that requires you, and that will be what you will be doing.
And I know that because I am at that point where I edit everything. I listen to these conversations over and over again, and I probably could just hand the audio over to someone. But again, that sort of goes back to control.
And that's because that for you, I would guess that's the art in a sense. That's where it is. That's the nub of it. And I think artists do spread themselves very thinly. And I often wonder why more artists don't, say, for example, group together and get a bookkeeper. And it seems to me that often there are underdeveloped opportunities. You only need someone to give you a hand for a bit, to give you that leeway. And sometimes people need an opportunity back in as well.
And sometimes,
young people, like students, whatever.
Exactly. And sometimes, like you say, sometimes you need someone just to potentially show you a system that could speed up your workflow, do anything. And you go, wow, I didn't realise I could do it.
Like 1 hour with this virtual assistant, we had a meeting on productivity where she talked to me about systems. So there's so much stuff. Anyway, so there's that. So there's lots of things that I had to put into place. And then, of course, what happened as a result of running that business in inverted commas properly, to a certain extent, was that other people started to notice that I was doing this, and other opportunities happened, and that they happen in quite an organic way. So I was working with someone whose son was a student at Falmouth University. She told her son about me. Her son told the tutor. They called me and said, "Oh, will you run a professional practice class for Falmouth Uni for this course?"
Great.
I did that for 4 years. As a result of doing that, someone saw LinkedIn that I was doing that, bit of third-party endorsement. And then I met John through LinkedIn, who runs,
Cosimo.
and we'll talk about John from Cosimo, who has lots of skills that I don't have. And we work together on some educational stuff. And so things grow. And then as that got better, my relationship with my work starts to improve because there's less pressure on it. And I start to feel like I'm re-emerging, but not repeating what I did before. I'm not the same person anymore. And I'm very clear on this idea. So at the moment, and probably by this time the podcast goes out, I'm guessing it'll be over, but I'm just doing a studio sales show of work that I made 7, 8, 9 years ago, just because I wanted it to have one last airing and then it's done. It's like some kind of closure for me.
And is then the next move, obviously carrying on with your art advisory roles and things like that?
Yeah.
Then are you looking to start creating again yourself?
So I do create myself. I just haven't been sharing it as much. I've set myself the challenge of moving into a slightly different area. I don't know that I want to, as an artist, enter the fray of competing with other visual artists that are doing big paintings and the gallery world and all that. I find it draws me back a little bit like an addict who needs to steer clear of certain things. I think probably that's not great for me.
But is that because the balance for you has always been about the art rather than the commerce, and the fact that you don't want to drag your art into that world because you've almost covered that commerce side and your income and your bills with being the art advisor?
That is covered, but yeah.
So it frees you up to be the artist that you want to be.
There's also a sense that I was nearly 40 when I ended that journey, if you like, and now I'm nearly 50. And I'm very open to progressing as a human being as well, and trying desperately hard not to cling to things. It seems to me that clinging to previous identities for the sake of it often causes kind of problems in people's lives. So I'm trying to be very open to intuiting through myself what is right for me next.
Okay.
And then what I'm intuiting a lot is that if I look at the art world and the way that my work interacted with it before, forgetting all of the ego stuff and the financial stuff for a second, the way that I got to communicate with people was never quite satisfactory to me, in the sense that through painting, I was never really able to create the feeling in people in the gallery space that I would want. It's not quite the right kind of communication. The only kind of painting that does that, gets close to that for me, are really old paintings in really old rooms seem to create this feeling that I was after. So the world of...
A bit like drug taking, context and setting.
Context and setting. Absolutely, yeah. It can be great on that, yes. So the whole contemporary art world, if I think about now, my last solo show and that PV, and it was busy and full and people drinking wine and looking at the work and wanting me and chat to me about things. It was all great. It was lovely. But I don't think they're having the experience of the work. I don't think the work is doing the thing that I would hope it's doing. What it seems to me is that there's lots of contemporary art environments where it seems to be entertainment. And this might be a controversial thing to say, and might make some people cross with this. But the entertainment industry and the art world seems to have blurred a little bit. Yeah. You know what? I very rarely got asked what my work was about, is one of the giveaways.
Really?
Very rarely. I could do a whole show and maybe have 2 conversations about what the work was about.
Is that something to do with the perceived idea of, I should know what this art is about, so I don't have to ask the artist?
It was a bit scary.
I get it.
There was a bit of fear, I think.
Do you get the joke, almost?
Yeah. Again, there's another sense that the contemporary art world is also, it's through it now, I hope, but for a long time there was no place for earnestness or sincerity. Everything was sarcastic and the joke and the gag. And so it did scare audiences, I think. And I'm not interested in particularly jokes and gags that much. There are things, I like riddles and I like secrets and there are little games in my work, but I'm not really interested in pulling the wool over people's eyes or being smug about laughing at them, you know?
And you sometimes used to see those things at things like the Affordable Art Fair, where you'd have a huge scale canvas, dot painting, a bit like a Damien Hirst, and one of the dots will be missing and it will simply be called dot missing. Yeah. And you're like, wow, it looks like a Damien Hirst, it sounds like a Damien Hirst, it smells like a Damien Hirst, but it's not a Damien Hirst and it hasn't got a Damien Hirst price tag.
Yeah. I had a lovely conversation with one of my lecturers when I was at uni once. Beautiful man. He used to come from London just to teach us art history. And occasionally he'd have a chat to us about our work. And he said to me a lovely thing that really helped me, actually. We were talking about abstraction and figuration and isms. And he said, perhaps don't think about art in terms of those things. Maybe think about them in terms of there's either work for the head, work for the body, or work for the heart.
That's nice.
And it would seem to me that the postmodern thing became very much work for the head, very much work for the intellect, and some work for the body. It's very fashionable, and it is becoming more fashionable again. But heart art, not as easy in a way. And so for me, next, artistically, at the moment, I'm making large drawings that are very complex in small detail, which is new for me. And I'm interested, I think, in trying to recreate that feeling of being in some great 80s films. If you think about films like Gremlins and Is It Never Ending Story, in both of those, there's this place that the kid goes that's in Gremlins, it's a little shop. It's like magic, right? And in Never Ending Story is the bit where he hides in the attic of the school, puts the thing over, he lights candles and reads the book. That's the atmosphere that I love. I'm recreating that little bit of a kind of discovery of magic. And I think probably the answer to that for me is a more one-to-one relationship with a viewer where they're literally sitting in the quiet. The last place that they should be is at a party, in a sense.
Yeah.
Because it breaks all the tension. I want people to be opening an old book and go, wow, well, really? I don't know what this is. Yeah. This is mysterious and magical and a bit scary, maybe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's artistically for me. And then in a professional sense, the artist advisor will carry on. It's changing slightly in response to this proliferation of quite surface level improve your art courses and mentors, because I don't want to compete with that. And
you don't want to be the snake oil salesman.
I'd rather not. What I will say about snake oil is partly what we're talking about with snake oil is belief. It is about, what's that thing called where you take a tablet and it's nothing?
Placebo.
The placebo effect. So what I will say about it, I couldn't say that nothing about what I do is snake oil, because there's a certain element of confidence that people get from a conversation with me that is not really about the information. They go away feeling ready to work and feeling good. It's not snake oil, but it is
inspiration.
It's not. Yeah, it's not. There's nothing you can grasp, right? Now, some people purely trade on that confidence trick, and I'm not into that at all. But I do think that helping people have some self-belief is important, as well as giving them practical tools.
Would you consider it as, I don't know whether this is even the right word, but a slightly more holistic advice to art advice and
think
art
so.
guidance?
Yeah, and the move, I think, will be towards, I guess it's about defining the right audience. And some of my clients come to me and what they really need is how to sell a bunch more art. And I'll tell them that I'm not the person for them. Or some of them come to me thinking that they want what I've got to sell, and it turns out they probably don't. And we figure that out fairly quickly, and it's all fine. I'm never offended by that. That's all good if I'm not right for people. But I think there's going to be a slight shift back to, ironically, I think all the way back to the creative process. So I want to talk less about careers and more about work. Because if there's one trend, I suppose, that I see that bothers me, is that people spend more time worrying about social media than they do making work.
People who listen to this podcast regularly will probably be very bored of this quote, but the magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding.
There you go. Yeah, and that's a lovely quote. So I want people to work harder on their art. I want people to feel less entitled to success quickly.
And see that potentially the byproduct of working more on your art will be those knock-on effects of being, I understand it more. I can talk about it more. When I'm in a networking environment, I understand myself, my art, where I am.
And also to be more self-aware, to have a better sense of orienting themselves in their life, philosophically, even, which again, these are big, potentially earnest aspirations.
Do you think you're more aware now, Dean?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a certain element of just getting older, right? And I've been a dad. My daughter's 18, so I've had to go through all of the humility that can bring when you get that wrong. But yeah, I'm definitely more self-aware and a little bit softer in some ways, a little bit more opinionated in others. And what I've noticed is that the biggest result of that is that I'm much more comfortable with being wrong or having difficult conversations. I feel like that's a sign that my ego's quite in check. So I can absolutely disagree with someone and still talk about it and go away not being offended and hopefully not giving any offence.
And do you think that's a skill set that a lot of your clients need to learn?
I think so, because what I've noticed, and again, I'm not a psychologist or a counsellor, and I wouldn't pretend to be for a minute. I try not to go near that stuff if I can. But it is observable to me that people are trying to make very sophisticated work when sometimes their thought processes around, in general, as a human being, aren't very sophisticated. And so it would seem to me that you're trying to do something very difficult. And again, it's this balance, isn't it, between constantly self-questioning and going, is there a place that I could improve that or develop that? And then backing yourself at a certain point. This
Thinking versus doing. Just going, no, I've got this.
And generally, what I would say with my clients is they come to me in one state or the other. They're either too confident and entitled and need some kind of reality check, or they're too far the other way and need some confidence.
Yeah.
It's generally one.
So balance is key to all of this.
Yeah, a balance and an understanding that this is in flux all the time. And
constantly evolving.
And to try, the balance comes in this not, if you say to someone, you could do with being a bit less cocky, their response is often to go all the way to the other end of the scale, right? Or if you say to someone, you need to be more confident, they'll say things like, what, do you want me to be like an American?
Yeah.
You don't know. Well, just
take on some of those traits.
Just rein it in a bit. Yeah. There's a scale.
Yeah. There's a balance.
Balance. Yeah, absolutely. And I think really all I do as an art advisor is I get to look at someone's practice from the outside. I can generally see where there's an imbalance.
And that, guess, comes with every individual artist's identity and you being able to potentially find the difference to make them a better artist or communicator.
Yes. And sometimes that is what I call Mr. Miyagi type advice.
Yeah, brilliant.
Like, you just need to do this. And I don't know why I need to. I don't ask questions, just do this.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's that. And sometimes they're quite deep conversations, Sometimes they're...
Well, anything to do with identity is
Yeah.
tough, and addressing those, because like you say, a lot of people won't ever look at themselves.
Yeah. I have to say that sometimes for clients, what I do is a bit too deep.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So that's the self-selecting thing. I want people who are interested in seeing it holistically, seeing art making and life building as a sort of similar thing, and that one very much can inform the other, and that they're open to, I suppose, philosophical growth as much as anything.
Okay. I think I've got one sort of semi-last question.
Yeah.
And it goes back to identity. How do you identify? Are you an artist or are you an art advisor? Or do you identify as neither of those?
It's a really good question. I think that I'm an artist. If there was only an option to do one thing, then I'd make my work. However, being an art advisor or in some way an educator or a facilitator of change or something like that means that, for me, what it does for me is that it means I have to engage with other people. So there's a social aspect. It prevents me from sinking so deep into a world that I lose myself. It pulls me back into reality and I'm in the world again. And that is very healthy for me. But I would say,
is that because you still suffer from some of those demons?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'm still keeping an eye on things.
They do say that, though, don't they? By helping others, actually, it helps us get past a lot of our own demons.
Of course. And I learned, it sounds like a cliche, but absolutely true. I can sometimes do a session with a client where it's entirely about them and their work. And I come away having learned a tremendous amount.
Self-reflective.
It's really interesting. And sometimes clients almost directly teach you things. It's a wonderful back and forth. And the best clients, I have to say, are ones where the relationship gets stretched and it becomes a bit longer. So that I've got one client particularly that I'm thinking of, a wonderful artist called Caroline Pick, who I'm sure she won't mind me talking about. She's been working with me now for 3 or 4 years. And what she recognized quite early on, I think, was that the journey for it to be real was going to be slow. It's not like we do 2 weeks and off you go.
You're not the quick fix guy, are you?
Not really.
I'll get you to 10 grand in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, if you want to do it
Be
properly,
more American.
if you want to do it properly, then it takes a long time. And she's been great, and we've seen a massive change, not just in the work, but in terms of what she believes she's capable of or is possible.
Levels
and it's not false confidence either. It's not like you can do this. It's like it's come out of, we've done this step by step. We've proved it.
Again, the only way to combat imposter syndrome, give yourself irrefutable evidence that you can do the shit you say you're going to do. And she's taken the steps. And
now she's doing something crazy with 3D printers and Rolls Royce. And it's like, It's off the chart, right? And you see that progress and you go, yeah, that's an exemplar of what this is. It's longer. And I haven't given her any secrets, and we still speak every month. She needs that just to keep her on track.
Yeah. And like you say, some people react differently. They might not need the 5 top tips from the art advisor. They just might need that one conversation to go, you fucking got this. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I love is that the art world isn't really a world at all. It's a bunch of ecosystems that exist. And the first thing people need to do is be able to orientate themselves in them, figure out where they are in the map, and then figure out where everything else is, and then figure out what the terrain's like.
But then they need someone with your wealth of experience and knowledge who's been there, done it, got the T-shirt.
Yeah.
I think, as I say, we've done all the top tips at the head of the episode, haven't we? So we have got a closing tradition on the Creative Noah Land podcast. We like to get some sort of quote from our guest that resonates or inspiring to you or sits with you, but also someone in your world or your network that you think could be a potential great guest to come and inspire the Creative Noah Land audience.
Absolutely.
In any order you like, mate. What are you thinking?
So there's a quote, and it's a funny one, really. It's not immediately obvious, but it's been really important to me over the years. And it comes from, there are 2 versions of it from different sources. And one comes from Alan Moore in his first edition of Swamp Thing, amazingly, which is utterly fantastic. And there's a very small quote that at the start of the book, Swamp Thing says, there are lights everywhere. There's no room for monsters in this world anymore. It's a lovely quote. And then there's another quote that speaks to this, which is by Karl Ove Knausgaard in a book called A Time for Everything. He uses the phrase, it's not darkness that's to be feared, it's light where the dangers lie.
What do they mean to you?
So what that means to me, well, there are two things. Firstly, it seems to me in my artwork, I'm interested in the dark, the areas that we can't see, things that are hidden from us. And I'm interested in the fact that despite the fact that we know ever more information, we get ever more unwise. So the relationship between knowledge and wisdom seems to me to be somehow fractured and lost. And it also means, there's this notion, isn't there, that progression is always good. And of course, on a species sense, I think this is true. So it's much better that we've got penicillin now than we did before. It's much better that you can get put to sleep to have your wisdom tooth removed. I get all that. But at the same time, knowledge is seen in some way to be giving us all of the answers, and we're getting sadder the more we know. And I wonder if when there was more mystery in the world, when there was more speculation at times, when we didn't know everyone's news, when we couldn't take on global problems, when we had to deal with the edges of our village, and beyond that, mysterious, when there were monsters, somehow as we are more equipped to deal with things on that scale than we are. I remember looking at a news thing that said, scientists discover black holes can emit matter as well as absorb it. And I thought, what am I going to do with that? What that creates for me is more question, less certainty. It's too big for me in a way. It's great that the human race knows this, but it's not necessarily great that I have to deal with this. So I'm interested in the idea that our inner selves and the secrets and the darkness, and that there's a richness in there that the spotlight of information takes away, which is why I think there's probably, at the moment, there's a real trend for prehistory, for folklore, mythology. I think that the whole human race is feeling this problem. And lastly, it means that, I guess the side to this is, it's often the thing that you're not looking at that's the problem.
Right, it's Jungian shadow work.
Yeah, exactly. The shadow self idea is prevalent to this thing.
And going exactly what I said, most people won't look internally at themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lovely quote from Jung as well, isn't it? It says something like, people will go to incredible lengths to avoid dealing with themselves.
No, definitely.
Dealing with their own psyche, I think.
Definitely.
But to me, that is, it's often the thing that is opposite to the thing you think is the problem.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love
That's
that
great.
Constant kind of contrariness of that quote. And in terms of people, there's so many amazing people that I could suggest to you. I would suggest there's a creative who's a really great friend of mine called Chantal Powell. She has run an incredible residency program for artists down in Devon, a place called Hogchester. She runs a Jungian book club called the Red Book Club, which has got God knows how many hundreds of people have joined it. It's a free thing online. She's an artist and she is doing incredible things as an artist as well. I think one of the best things about her is that she's an academic, she's a researcher as well, interested very much in alchemy and Jungian psychology. So she works as an artist and she works as an educator as well.
Wow.
And I'd recommend her. I think she's done some really great things in the arts for artists, and she's fascinating.
Sounds great. I think we've tackled a lot there, dude. And I think the audience of the Creative Nolan podcast, especially those first few opening bits to explain your top tips of being the art advisor, and also the creative journey that potentially you've been on to give you the social proof you need to be said art advisor.
Yes, I really appreciate that. And it is a funny thing to talk about yourself for so long. And I guess if I can just tell you one last quote, again, my old boss Helga told me, it's that we used to joke a lot about needing to be special and different. I have this need to be special and different. And she said, we're all as special as everyone else, essentially. We're all special, we're all not special. in some way or other. And I think,
and if everyone's special, then no one is special.
And it feels odd talking about myself, I think. So
we appreciate it. And there's lots of great stuff that I think people, artists, creatives, and anyone looking to just do their thing can take away from it. Dean, thank you very much once again for doing the Creative No Land podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Creative No Land podcast. If you found anything in this episode useful or inspiring, please consider subscribing or sharing it with a friend. You can also help the podcast by clicking the Support the Show link in the show notes or by grabbing yourself something from the Creative No Land shop. And here's the bonus. When you join the community through our website, you'll get a special discount code that gives you free shipping on all orders. So, before you buy anything, be sure to join the community. Every bit of support helps us keep sharing these inspiring stories. So, thanks again for listening, and until next time, explore, inspire, and create.
Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And so, therefore, it's so important to consider this question: what do I desire?